Welcome to this episode of the Connecting Faith to Life podcast. I'm Trey Rhodes, the Connections Pastor here at Northwood Baptist Church in North Charleston, South Carolina. In just a few moments, our lead pastor, Dr. Tommy Metter, will be joining the conversation as well. In our crazy and chaotic world, our hope is that these few minutes will help you stop and reflect on your relationship with Jesus as you learn to connect Christ-centered faith to your everyday life. I usually say that we're charging right up to, but actually we are on episode 170 of the Connecting Faith to Life podcast. And again, this week, I had two people tell me, keep it going, man. This is really impacting my life. It's making a difference.
Good.
And we enjoy it. My family sits around and listens to it. And
kind of like the olden days when you didn't have television, which you remember those days, Pops, where you would sit around the big old radio and listen to it. You guys do that with the Connecting Faith to Life podcast. You get around the big old radio and you sit there and turn it on with the candlelight and... Yeah. Is that what y'all do?
That is exactly what we do. We have battery-operated stuff. We don't have electricity. We're out in the sticks somewhere.
Yeah. How's the outhouse? Do you enjoy using the outhouse?
It's okay. The bugs at night get to you, but...
Yeah. You lived overseas. You probably have some real experiences with the outhouse. Well, when you grew up, there wasn't indoor plumbing. So you remember from childhood there being no indoor plumbing, right?
Yeah. I had, sure. Yeah, I'll just go with it.
When I was in Russia, I went to Russia a number of times, and the areas we visited in Russia, there was no indoor plumbing. And so I would take 15, 20 people on these mission trips, and we would all use outhouses.
Oh, my heavens.
That was an interesting experience.
Well, I wish they used outhouses in Africa. They just...
They just used the outside.
Yes, they just...
No outhouse, just an outside.
Hence, all the diseases, cholera and such.
Yeah.
But
that's interesting. Some of those outhouses were pretty nice. I know we got some. In these areas of Russia, they would make these. They would kind of artistically build their outhouses where they looked like little whatever, and you would go inside, and I mean it still stunk and all those kind of things. But they would try to do it up on the inside, make it a little nice. And
I thought they'd light a candle or two in there.
Oh
maybe.
Man, I tell you what, that's an interesting place. So anyway, enough about outhouses. Let's move on to something else.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking today about something that is probably worse than outhouses, and that is sin and what we do about it as far as followers of Christ. Yeah. I once heard that we are just beggars telling other beggars where they can find bread. And Jesus left us with one of the greatest and most profound tasks that the world has ever known. And the interesting thing about this task is it starts one person at a time.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for men like Billy Graham who were able to preach to millions. But in that same time, many more millions were saved as a result of other Christians sharing the gospel with others. So anyway, so we've been left here to share the good news of Jesus with those around us. And it seems easy enough, but for the church, it's always been a tough task. And we don't quite understand why that happens. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, so here's what we're doing. Over the next few weeks at Northwood, we're starting a new series of messages. The series of messages is called Conversations That Connect. And so what we're going to do for the next 5 or 6 weeks is we're simply going to talk about how to more effectively share the gospel. How do you get into the gospel conversations? How do you talk about things like sin? How do you talk about faith? How do you talk about eternity? How do you talk about heaven? How do you talk about hell? So we're going to talk about all those things on Sunday mornings for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And so what I like to do before we do a series of messages, I just like to talk about that series of messages. We do this every time. And we did a podcast about the book of Psalms when we did the book of Psalms. And, we just take an episode to talk about why we're getting into a series like this. And so we're going to be taking the next 5 or 6 weeks and just talk about sharing the gospel. So we're done with Psalms. Which was a pretty long series, Pops.
Yeah, I did.
20 weeks of Psalms.
In my head, I didn't think it was going to be 20 weeks. I don't know why, but it was.
It was long.
Everyone was good and different, and I think that was your fear. You didn't want to say the same thing over and over again, but you didn't. It was really good how you designed it to, make sure that we got a huge swath of what the Bible was talking about.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It was good. I learned a lot walking through the book of Psalms like that. It was very helpful for me to do that. But now we're on to this topic of sharing the gospel. So it's not going to be an expository series like we usually do through a particular book. We're going to jump around a little bit over the next 5 weeks, look at some different passages to help us think about how to more effectively share the gospel. Because people do struggle with sharing the gospel. I mean, I think even my own life, I think that I share the gospel. Oh, I know I share the gospel pretty regularly, but I still want to grow in it. I still want to be more effective. I still want to, because it's hard. I mean, I think about, in my own neighborhood, conversations that I still want to have, that I've been telling myself, I'm going to have that conversation, but just haven't, made the opportunity yet to have those conversations with some of my neighbors that I want to have. And even in my own family, and we all know that that talking about Jesus with your own family members is one of the hardest things you can do. I mean, we have family members that we regularly try to encourage and talk with about things of the faith, and it's hard, right? And so I know that if you're listening to this episode, that more than likely, that this is what God wants from you. He wants you to share the gospel. But also more than likely, you probably struggle with this. We all just tend to struggle with sharing the gospel effectively, well, and often.
Yeah, I agree. I wish that I could tell you that I was taught when I was saved that this is what we do. And so, it's, I don't know if natural's the word. Yeah. But it's always been a part of my life. I always consider when I'm talking to someone, how can I get the gospel in here? Yeah. And and the difference is I used to push so hard for gospel transformation, and that's not my job. And I think that concerns us. And I do want to put a plug in that we actually started this just before COVID. If you remember.
Yeah. So some of you who are part of our church, I know we have a lot of people now in our church that weren't here before COVID, and so you don't remember this. But if you're part of our faith family, some of you remember that right before COVID, we were really focusing in on this.
We had people
that
going
were
at it.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
We got together in the Family Life Center for a couple weeks, just our entire church family. That was really cool. We had we were tight in there. But we fit us all in there, and we had some very good, just really heart conversations about sharing the gospel and why we don't do it. And those were really, really special times. But then COVID hit, and we kind of had to stop that because we didn't know what was going on in the world at the time. We didn't want to get everybody in that confined space because we didn't want to pass COVID around. So that COVID kind of halted some of that momentum we've had. Now our church has gotten so large that it's just not physically possible for us to gather back in that Family Life Center around tables like we did and talk through these things like we might want to. So I'm hoping that through this series of messages and through our Life Connection groups that we'll be able to recreate some of that momentum that we had prior to COVID, because people were starting to understand the urgency, and I think people were beginning to really share their faith well. And so we're just trying to get back to that point, and I think this is going to be really helpful and timely for us. And so today I just want to talk about some reasons why this is so important for us, and some reasons why we're going to take the next 5 or 6 weeks and focus in on learning how to be more effective in sharing the gospel.
All right. Well, let's start with this one. Number one, the greatest problem in our world is sin.
Yeah, now that should go without saying. And I think if you're listening, you're like, okay, Tommy, really? We already knew that. But the reality is, we don't think about that near enough.
No,
that the reality is that every person that chooses to reject Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of their lives will spend an eternity apart from the grace of God in a place called hell. That is biblical truth.
Yes, it is.
The greatest problem in this world is rebellion against the God who loves us and the God who has created us. And I think we just sometimes forget that because we get so focused on other problems. Right now in this country, we're facing an economic downturn.
Yeah.
That seems to be the greatest problem, right? My 401k, it's down whatever the percentage is. You look at your 401k and you go cry, right? Because it's just so bad right now. So you think, man, or what's probably going to happen over the next 8 or 9 months in our country is probably going to enter into a recession. People are going to lose their jobs. It's going to be some tough times, And so in our minds we're thinking that's the greatest problem. Or if you've been watching the news, you think about what's been taking place in Ukraine with Russia invading that country. And over the last few weeks, we've had some elevated talk about nuclear war. Wow. That's a big deal, you know, and we can't even imagine what that might look like if something like that were to happen. And so we think, man, that's the greatest problem is Putin and this threat of nuclear war. I mean, so there's and then just personal problems. I mean, I know that even within our church, there are people struggling through some very serious issues right now, whether it's a sickness and disease employees, whether it is just family issues, work-related issues, school-related issues. Some of us in our congregation are really carrying some heavy loads right now, and we got problems. Everybody's got problems. Everybody's got problems, and then there's probably not a time in your life or a time in our world where there will not be some type of problem.
That's right.
I mean, that's just the reality of living on this planet. Is this planet is full of problems, and that should not surprise us. But all of those problems that plague our world do not compare to the problem of sin and lostness. In fact, what we believe as followers of Jesus, it's because of sin that we have so many problems. Because sin, Adam and Eve's decision to rebel against God has caused us to live in a broken world. We live in a world that's just tough because sin has had its effects on this world. So really, if you think about it, and I know that many of you listening, you know this, but just that reminder that the greatest problem in our world is sin and lostness. Sin and lostness, that there are billions of people who have never placed their faith in Jesus Christ. That's a problem.
That is a big problem.
And it's going to continue to be a problem. And so for us, it's having that perspective that there's a huge problem in the world, and it's not the economy, it's not the threat of nuclear war. Those are very serious problems, obviously. But the biggest problem is, and always will be until Christ returns, sin. Sin and rebellion and lostness. That's the problem.
And so as God's people, I think we need to recognize that. And, when people come to us, one of the easiest ends has always been, for me, because they complain about what's going on. I said, well, we do live in a broken world.
Yeah.
And the world was broken because of sin. It's an easy way to get in.
That's right. So when you think about having gospel conversations, we're going to talk about over the next couple Sundays, just this problem of sin and how we can enter into those conversations, because that is a good segue. I mean, it's just real easy. I mean, if you are, the most religious person on the face of the planet, or the most not religious person on the face of the planet, I think everybody would agree, this world ain't right. There's some problems. And let me tell you why this world isn't right.
Yeah.
And so that is a good segue or end, if you will, to be able to have some really good gospel conversations, just understanding why the world is broken is because of sin.
Amen. Second reason is this: the solution for the world's greatest problem is the gospel.
Yeah, that's what we're getting to over the next weeks together is we know what the problem is. Well, what's the solution? The solution is the gospel message of Jesus Christ, right? So if you think about the economy, that's a big problem. You think about the war in Ukraine, that's a big problem. But, Putin and, pulling out of Ukraine is not going to solve the world's biggest problems.
No.
The economy taking an uptick is not going to solve the world's biggest problems. The only solution for the world's biggest problem is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
God sent his son to die on the cross in our place and then to rise again 3 days later. That is the solution. And we know that. Followers of Jesus, we know the solution for the biggest problem in the world, but we just have a hard time talking about that solution. And so again, it's reminding ourselves that there's a problem and God has provided the solution, and that solution is Jesus Christ. And we just have to learn how to engage in those conversations and help people to understand that. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 5 or 6 weeks. How do we, again, get into those conversations where we talk about the solution?
My concern, and I think it is a concern, is the gospel, and you've said this multiple times in your messages, the gospel is not my testimony.
Yeah.
The gospel is not a good story. And you all, the things that we think we've done to share the gospel, and we've really never shared the gospel.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, I think, a huge part of understanding, okay, now that we understand there is sin, where do we go from here? How do we get, how do we get into what really matters?
That's real good, Trey, because that is the issue, right? We like to have God talk, but in our God talk, we never get to the gospel, right?
We invite to church.
Yeah, let me invite you to church.
That's good.
Please invite people to church, because if they come to a church like this, they will hear the gospel.
Yes.
But man, there was a survey done years ago. It hasn't been that long ago, probably about 10 years ago, by a guy named Gary McIntosh. Gary McIntosh is one of those big church growth guys, evangelism strategists, and he's done a lot of research in the field of evangelism and sharing the gospel. And he surveyed, I don't remember the number of people, he and his team surveyed a number of people on what it was that ultimately brought them to faith in Jesus Christ. So Christians who have, who obviously were lost and came to Christ, what was it? What was the influence that brought you to Jesus Christ? And overwhelmingly, I don't remember the number, but overwhelmingly, when people were asked, what brought you to faith in Jesus Christ? Overwhelmingly, the response was a friend or a family member.
Yeah.
The witness of a friend or family member. Not a pastor, not a Billy Graham crusade, not, some kind of church outreach. All those things are important.
Or TV or radio and all those things we think are so important.
And they are important, and we should do those things. But we underestimate, and we're going to talk a lot about this this Sunday.
Yeah.
We underestimate the influence of personal conversations about Christ with the people that we love. People that you love, that you have influence over, they might not agree with you all the time. They might not agree with you about salvation and all those kinds of things. But the more you talk with them and pray for them, the more they're going to, listen to what you have to say. You know what I'm saying? And so don't underestimate the influence that you have in the life of someone else, right? That's just the reality that God uses you. And that leads us right into the third reason why we're going to have this series of sermons.
Yeah, so the greatest problem is sin. The solution of the world's greatest problem is the gospel. And number 3, God's plan for reaching people with the gospel is the church.
It's the church. And when I say the church, I don't mean, the organization at 2200 Green Ridge Road in North Charleston or the local church. We're not talking about the building. We're talking about the people. Yeah. The people that come and gather in this place Sunday after Sunday to hear the word, to be equipped by the word, and then go back out into their community to live for Christ, to bear the fruit of the Spirit, and to open their mouths and talk about Jesus. And so we are. You think about it. The world's greatest problem is sin. The solution to that problem is the gospel. And we are the ones who get to talk about that solution.
Wow.
You're not going to hear, right? You're not going to hear politicians talk about the gospel. I mean, at least, you might hear some of our politicians who are saved talk about the gospel, but our politicians who are not for the most part, right? Because that's not their job. That's not it's the job of the church to share the gospel. It's the job of God's people to make Christ known. You're not going to hear a secular, dying world talk about the solution because they don't know the solution. But you do.
Exactly.
Right? God's people know the solution. And so since we know the solution, we're the ones who are called to talk about that solution. And so God, and that's the amazing reality as well. God could have chosen numerous ways to communicate the truth of the gospel. He could have wrote it in the sky, right? He could have, whatever. He could have brought an angel down to say, hey, believe in Jesus. But that's not how he's chosen to do it. The way that God has chosen to spread the good news of the gospel is through people who've been changed by the gospel. We are, right? The Bible tells us over and over again, ambassadors of Christ. We are, right? The aroma of Christ among the dying. And so just understanding that. And that's why we're talking about this, because we have to understand that we're God's plan. We're God's plan to reach the world with the gospel.
And this is not contingent upon whether they're a large church. They share the gospel. They should be sharing the gospel. The truth is that every church, every size, everywhere can share the gospel.
Yeah, that's right.
You're in the middle of a farm world where I was in Utahville. You know what? The farmers can share the gospel with their farmer friend. Yeah. And we, that was happening. And, you have to just say, okay, this is not an issue that has to do with big church, small church, medium-sized church, rural church, city church. It is every church. Yeah. And it's so important that we understand that. And it concerns us greatly because as pastors, we see churches that are dying. Yeah. As a result, you ask them, when's the last time you had a baptism? Not that baptism saves, but it's kind of an indicator. And they'll say, well, we haven't had one in 3 years. We haven't had one in 8 years, whatever. Yeah. And it's a concern. It's concerning.
And we're working with a church right now that, when they think about their history over the last 10 years, they can only think of one baptism they've had in 10 years. Yeah. That's heartbreaking, right? And so we have many churches, even in our own community within the Charleston area, that are on the verge of closing their doors because they've lost some of that gospel urgency. They've forgotten their mission. And we don't want to be that at Northwood. We want to continue to be a church that majors in sharing the gospel, right? So God's plan for reaching people with the gospel is the church. And this fourth reason why we're doing this is because the church just struggles with this.
Yeah, they do.
We struggle with sharing the gospel. Why do you think it is, Trey? Why do you think we struggle so much with sharing the gospel as a church?
I think in the United States of America, it's a fear of rejection.
Yeah.
I think it's also a fear of what is my boss going to think, or what is my peeps going to think. You know, I'm not going to get invited to the cool things. I'm not going to be one of the cool kids. I mean, so and I get to work with the youth, and we have this very similar situation with the youth. They don't want to share the gospel with their friends at school because they're not one of the cool kids if they do.
Yeah.
They're not going to get beat up or hit or slapped or anything else. They might be, ridiculed. That happens. But, it just floors me. And we have talked to our missionaries that are like, we're in communist China versus Taiwan now. Yeah. And Taiwan, because the freedom of the gospel is open, the churches are just not sharing the gospel. Whereas in communist China, that's all they did.
Yeah.
And so it's just it's such a paradox.
Yeah. So I think there's several things, right? That one, there is that reality within a Western culture that we're far too concerned with our social standing, and we don't want to do anything that might hinder or demote our social standing among people, right? That I want people to think well of me, like me, all those kinds of things. If I start talking religion and politics, right, then that could affect things. So we never talk religion and politics. And the reality is, I don't like to talk politics, but I do like to talk religion. I like to talk about what Jesus Christ has done in my life, right? And even that's going to affect what others think about me. The calling doesn't change. The calling is not to be liked by people. The calling is to do God's will, and God's will for my life is to make Christ known and to make disciples. And so I got to get over that. I got to get over, this desire to have a certain social standing. I think, also why we struggle is we just don't know what to say.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know how to, and that's why we're having these series of messages. We don't know how to get into the conversation, or when we're in the conversation, we freeze up, right? Or we're afraid that we won't be able to answer somebody's questions, because it happens.
Yeah.
You have people who don't know Christ. They're going to have some questions that maybe you've never thought of, and questions that you might not have an answer to. And it's okay to say, I don't right now have an answer to that question. I can think through that. We can search the scriptures together. But here are the answers I do have. Here's what I do know. I don't know that, but I do know this. It's okay to say that, because some of us we will never have all the answers for every question that's asked of us. There is that fear of being mocked, and we don't want to be mocked for our faith. And I get that, but that's just reality. You're probably going to, from time to time, be told, man, believing that Christianity stuff, that's crazy. That's for weak people. You believe in a bunch of stories and myths that didn't happen. That's you're going to get those kinds of comments, and you just have to be okay with that. So I think we struggle because of social standing. We struggle because maybe we don't know what to say. We struggle because we don't think we're going to have all the answers. There's just a host of reasons why we struggle. And so then we take those struggles and we use those for excuses for not doing that very thing that we know God has called us to do.
Yeah, it's tough. People constantly, and people that are, and the sad thing is, I don't know if sad's the word, but certainly a concerning thing is that people that really are deep followers of Christ, you still get down to, well, when's the last time you shared the gospel?
Yeah.
And they say, well, I haven't got around to that yet, that part of it yet, Yeah. And so it's for most Christians, it's like the last thing they do, and so it's
which is sad, because I remember this when we did this a couple years ago, and we sat around the tables in the Family Life Center and we talked through this. There were people in our church who confessed, hey, I've never shared the gospel.
Right.
I've gone, 10, 15, 20 years of my Christian life, and I've never shared the gospel. That's the story of a lot of followers of Jesus. And I don't say that to make us feel guilty, but that's where a lot of us are. And changing that story from I have never to I have. I've shared the gospel this past week, or whatever the case may be. And knowing that while it is sometimes difficult to have those conversations, and while sometimes those conversations might not go as well as you wanted them to go, or that person you shared with might not have given their lives to Jesus in that moment, or might have even ridiculed you, I don't know of a person who's come back to me and said, hey, I went and shared the gospel, and that was a really bad idea. I wish I wouldn't have done that. Not because you don't do that. When you are obedient to Christ, there's always joy in that. and there's always a sense of, man, I've done what God has called me to do. It was hard. It didn't even go the way I thought it would go. That person laughed at me or whatever, but I did it, and I'm glad I honored the Lord with that, right? And again, understanding that when it comes to sharing the gospel, the calling on our lives is just to share it, right? God is the one who brings the harvest. God is the one who is at work in the life of the believer. It is God's role to change the heart of a person, not mine. My role is to be obedient to the Lord and just open my mouth and share the good news with somebody else and leave the rest in God's hands. And so if somebody mocks you or laughs at you or doesn't come to faith in Christ in that moment, that's not on you.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I'm saying? You've done what God has called you to do, and you can rest in that reality that you've been obedient to the Lord.
Amen. You know, we use these words a lot. Well, we planted a seed.
Yeah.
And really that's a big part of it.
That is.
And sometimes it is that opportunity. They've never heard the gospel. And I think we've done enough studies to know that typically people don't come to the gospel the first time they hear it. Typically.
Right.
Now, they can, and they do, but typically that doesn't happen. But somewhere they have to hear it first.
That's right.
And so we need to be those people that are sharing that and planting that seed.
That's right.
All right, number 5, and this is the last one for the day. The church needs to be equipped to share the gospel.
Yeah, this is ultimately why we're doing this. This is ultimately why we're doing this, because we want to equip you. Yeah. We want you to have the confidence, the ability, the desire, and so we're doing this to give you those things, to give you those resources, abilities. I mean, as we walk through this series together, we're going to give you very specific ways you can share the gospel. We're going to give you tools to do so. We're going to practice it.
Right.
You know, and we're going to challenge our Life Connection group leaders to each week lead a time where you're actually practicing with each other, so you feel more confident in doing it. We're gonna have some accountability. This Sunday we're going to start talking about specific people that we know who are far from Jesus. I'm gonna have you as a congregation to begin to list people's names, just that you know who are far from Jesus, and we're going to pray over those names in our Life Connection groups every week. We're going to talk about opportunities that you've had to actually talk to those people. And so we're going to do the best that we can over the next 5 or 6 weeks to equip you so that you feel more confident in that calling that God's placed on your life. The reality is, we got to do this. We got to do this because this is what God has called us to do. And it's our prayer that over the next 5 or 6 weeks that God will renew within us a passion and a desire to actually do it.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. And while everybody's not going to do this, we understand that. I believe there's a lot of people that want to, that are just in this situation
just
where
need the extra
they
push,
need that little,
extra training, the extra encouragement. Absolutely.
And it's going to make a difference, not only in their lives, but the lives of the people around them.
Absolutely.
It's going to be exciting to hear what God does in these next weeks.
That's right.
Well, Pastor, this has been really good. I appreciate the opportunity that we always have as a church to share the gospel. And for us to be able to train them is a big deal.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for having this vision to get our church. And by the way, this is not just for our church. You know, if you want to come and learn how to share the gospel on Sunday mornings and go back to your church, we'd love to have you too.
Come on.
Yeah. Well, Pastor, why don't you close us and get us ready for next week?
I do hope today's been helpful for you. I hope it's been encouragement and a blessing. And I hope that if this has been encouragement and blessing to you, that you'll go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can have new content delivered to your device every single week. Leave us a 5-star review. That helps us to get word out about our podcast. And as always, we hope today's episode helps you connect faith to life.